Howdy, of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Black Widow. So, the very first question for a lot of people is like, well, hey, that 30 bucks on Disney Plus, early access or premier access, like, well, should I do that? Like, I'm kind of weighing back and forth about it. Well, here is me giving you a different chance or a different opportunity that maybe you might not be aware of. Well, if you're contemplating that $30, I can tell you there's a way that you can go out of your way to see this for free. There's an app that exists, excuse me, there's an app that exists called C Movies, letter C Movies. You can watch Black Widow right now for absolutely free. You can watch it unlimited times until October is to come around, and then you are able to watch this movie for absolutely free. But now here's the thing. A lot of people might just make the consensus of like, well, I'm probably going to like this movie. I'll probably spend the $30 and then I'll just be able to see it as many times as I want after that, because some people might have been already going into the premium access stuff regardless because this is a Marvel thing. And so I would just say, okay, well, that eliminates your options right now. So now a lot of people would just be like, okay, well, since like, you know what, I'm kind of like just wondering like how good this movie is going to be. Well, here is my thing. I mentioned to people that I'm always an honest reviewer, and immediately when people hear that, immediately they'll be like, okay, where is he going with this? So I would tell you, if it's for me, I would tell people to take the free option and then eventually like see if you want to just spend the 30 bucks regardless. Like if you have 30 bucks to blow, then you might as well go and watch this movie for premium access. That's what I did just because my parents were making the consensus of just like, well, they just want to see this film and they want to see it on Disney Plus. I'm like, okay, fine, go ahead, do that. Like that's okay. Because really, just the whole like unlimited amount of times that you could watch this movie just kind of was a big incentive for not only them but for me saying like, well, yeah, that probably does sound like a pretty decent deal. So, but here's the thing after watching this. So, this is not an actual origin story of this character, like to me. Like, this just feels like a movie that is now to be dubbed a movie that is sandwiched in between two films of a Marvel universe. To where it's like, that's gonna just make this movie probably completely forgettable, or something that you don't actually have to watch now because it doesn't feel overall that there is something that you absolutely need to come into this movie and watch. This movie, for the most part, kind of feels bottled within itself, and there is no real surprises within this movie that overall garner you to just be like, man, I need to go out of my way to watch this film. There are some stuff that does feel like clickbaiting to me. Like basically the Red Room feels like a clickbaiting thing to me, and that's the like that's the story that we're supposed to go into this movie. Uh, Taskmaster feels like a clickbaiting character to me. Like I couldn't feel absolutely that this character copies everyone. Like I didn't get that gist of this character. It just feels like this character was just there to seem just like a Winter Soldier like character. And so we get a mimic of a Winter Soldier like character in this film, which just this is not a Captain America Winter Soldier kind of movie to me. It doesn't have that huge epic scale. Like, yeah, it jumps around in a number of places, but it's not at all like a Captain America Winter Soldier like big kind of film where like everybody and their brother isn't involved in this one. No. General Ross feels like a clickbaiting character. It honestly feels like they spend way too much time focusing on Natasha, the Red Guardian, Belova, and Melina, who are we are to find out basically Natasha's uh, like family in this film. So with that said, so everything else is just a clickbaiting thing. Taskmaster is basically and honestly a complete throwaway character, which is sad because I was actually excited for Taskmaster to be in this film, and then all of a sudden I was heavily disappointed by this character whatsoever. And I'm just being honest, and some people might not like this review, and that's perfectly okay, because at the end of the day, I'm being honest. I'm trying to, like, and some people might feel the same, and some people might feel the opposite, and that's okay. Uh, really, I was kind of ticked off about, like a sandwich movie, where, like, this movie's being sandwiched between two films. This should have completely sold itself, and I don't feel it didn't. I feel like these scenes in Age of Ultron where Natasha was to showcase scenes of the Red Room previously to us, like I think that probably explains a lot more of the Red Room than this movie even does. We have a quick explanation of what the Red Room actually does, and that's that's pretty much it for me. Uh, Really, we don't have much of the early years of Black Widow or Natasha being in the Red Room. There isn't anything like that in here, and that's what ticked me off the most. Really, it just kind of like shows the very early stages, and then it skips to sandwich time, and then like just enjoy the ride, enjoy the family adventure, and then call it a day. And so yeah, so if anything, here's also the funny thing. This movie sounds exciting. If you were to basically watch this movie without the visual representation, this movie sounds like an exciting film with the dialogue and stuff like that. This movie sounds like an exciting film without watching it. But when you are to watch this film, you're just like, okay, like this movie kind of overall feels cheap. Like it kind of feels like weaker compared to a lot of the other Marvel films, even something like Ant-Man, or like this feels like the cheapest movie compared to all of the other ones. And yeah, you could say it's like, well, this is a spy film, and like, if anything, you might just not like the genre of a spy film. And I'm like, no, I just don't like this kind of film because it feels cheap. It does. And I don't like, to me, like people could feel the opposite. I just feel this is cheap. It's boatloads of cheap. This movie jumps all over the place, not only with certain numbers of locations, but then also like, of course, time period, because it just needs to be whatever it needs to be to just say, hey man, Black Widow, we did it. So I'm just kind of like, and plus also the end credit scene is like, so is this movie gonna get a sequel? Like, is that a no? Is this sequel just gonna be what it is and then that's it? Like, man, does that like suck? Are they gonna have a Black Widow prequel movie that finally does explain the Red Room? Is there gonna be like something that happens between other sandwich movie of Black Widow? I don't know if I'd be interested in that, but like at least like give this woman another film. But I guess if like that's gonna be it, then I'm gonna be like, man, like this kind of left a bitter taste in my mouth to just be like, so when are we gonna have? Well, like I guess we can't have like another person um, that eventually I will probably get into with this movie. And probably also, I was like, man, I was thinking, I'm like, man, we're gonna have General Ross in this film. Maybe we'll have Hulk in this film. And I was like, man, like, I can't wait for them to, like, put some big, huge things in this movie. But they didn't do anything with any of this. They didn't like they didn't go further into anything. Like they didn't like this movie is such a like deflating film while watching it to just be like, oh, so this movie just goes nowhere. Oh, great. So there's no point in watching this then. It's no point in watching this movie. It goes nowhere. So that's a sad point about it. It just goes nowhere and it doesn't help me like get to any further part of explanation of really truly like Widow's past. It just leaves it even in more vague like sense to just be like, okay, well, we're gonna just vague this out, and then like this will be it. It's like, fuck. So that's all I have to say. That's all I want to say about this movie in a very cryptic like sense. Let's go into spoilers because reasonably people can get my consensus of this film. This movie is just a solid okay film, or just an okay film to me. Like, I would probably go out of my way to also say that this is probably also like a bad film in a lot of people's eyes, an awful film, a film that people are just kind of severely angry about because they didn't want to have to wait this long to see this film. Like, they should have really pushed this thing out, and they didn't. And now they're probably going to get a lot of backlash for waiting so long to release this film. Like, I don't care if it has ties to XYZ thing, but still, like, I also think that this film didn't needed to be sat on for how long that it was sat on for. So, anyways, let's get into that double 5 time territory because reasonably, I think it's that coveted time to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about the time to spoil another movie. So, the very beginning of this is to take place in Iowa in 1995. So, reasonably, I might have to kind of like trickle back and forth just to get certain names to just make sure that I'm getting names correct. Because immediately I'm going to assume that I'm probably going to mess up some kind of names somewhere. So that probably will happen. But anyways, so let's go into this. So immediately, oh my god. Ugh. Let's go back there. All right. So Ohio, 1995. So we have kids who are to be kids and be playing. And so these kids are to eventually go into the house. And so Alexei, who is the Red Guardian, is to come home to tell Melina that he is to have a disc from the North Institute. And like that, it was the only disc that he could get that wasn't already burnt. So it's kind of telling that there was some like really crazy things that happened to Red Guardian as he was to get out of somewhere. So so the family sits down for dinner, and so the Red Guardian, or Alexei, is to explain to his family, hey, remember the thing that I told all of you that eventually at some point we would have to go and leave for an adventure? Well, now I think that's going to actually happen. And so all of a sudden that means this whole entire family, after dinner is over, is to go and scramble and get every single bit of clothing or anything that they can just like collect as quickly as possible to get out of this house, because eventually they have to scramble and go to a hangar to get on a plane to go and fly to Cuba, because it seems that there are like, I will call them shield operatives, but we might be calling them something else sometime later in this movie. So, so this family is to fly on to Cuba, and so all of a sudden, once Alexei is to talk to a guy named Dreykov, all of a sudden Alexei is to drop his American accent and all of a sudden start to talk Russian. And so, like, talk Russian meaning like he has a Russian accent. So, we find during the escape that Melina had gotten shot, and so they are quickly sending Melina out to a hospital to try to take care of her wound. And Alexi's like, "Hey, like Melina's strong, like she'll make it through it." And so what ends up happening as is that one, the Red Guardian is desperately asking Dreykov, like, "Hey man, like I want to get back into the Red Guardian suit. Like I don't want to do all of these undercover things. I want to get back and doing like Red Guardian. I want to do that." And Dreykov is like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like we'll get you back into that." But so what ends up happening is that these kids are just to be sent off somewhere. These two kids are just to be shipped off to eventually just become these things called widows. And like, if you of course know Black Widow, yeah, like basically these girls are to be sent off to the Red Room and become widows. Like I guess that's the multiplier of Black Widow, but like these things are just called widows, so you get what I'm saying. So all of a sudden now we're just getting this huge montage of time passing and intro screens and credits and like we're getting little blips and stuff like that of like home videos of uh, Natasha and Belova, because we are to find out the girl with the blue hair is actually Natasha and the girl with the yellow hair is Belova. So now, after this beginning scene is to be over, now we just transition into 21 years later. And this is to be tying into Civil War, Captain America Civil War. This is what is to happen right after that. And I'm like, say what? I'm like, wait a minute. Like, how was I supposed to know that right away? Like, you for, like, not saying, like, 21 years later, right after Captain America Civil War. Then I would have been like, wait a minute, pause this movie right now. I'm going to go and see Captain America Civil War then, and then watch this movie because they didn't tell me where this movie was to be tied from. Like, that would have been a nice freaking explanation to just say, hey guys, watch these two movies because, actually watch technically three movies because you're going to need to remember anything that's going on in these spots. Like, was there showing of that in any of the trailers? Doesn't seem like it. It doesn't seem like I was getting, like, how could I possibly get interviews, like, right now, as hard as they are to come by, of anyone telling me, hey, like, definitely watch these movies to understand this one. They should have had that everywhere, and they had that nowhere. Like, they should have had that somewhere to help me understand this. So Natalie is to be hiding from Ross. She's in some bathroom somewhere, and so Ross is coming after her because of Ross has already captured all of the other Civil War members, and like Ross mentions that basically, like in a very cryptic like sense, they talk about Wilson, which is of course Falcon. They talk about Roger being on the run, which technically he is. But eventually, towards the end of Civil War, like, of course, Captain America goes and rescues these people. Or, like, no. Captain America rescues these people in Infinity War, and so they get rescued. Anyways, moving on. So, like, Ant-Man is actually on house arrest, so that's a different story, and Like they've captured Clint, they've captured every. If you watch Civil War, like this is basically the continuous from that, and so Ross is talking about uh, that Natalie is to answer for the assault of the Black Panther, which was the original, like, so the original King of Wakanda before Chadwick was to become King of Wakanda. So, if anything, Natalie is to just call Ross and just to mention how, like, Ross is to mention that Natalie's a fugitive and like Natalie's just going like, "Man, aren't you a little like like should you not be going at this as hard as you are anymore?" Like if anything, this is kind of pathetic. It's like if anything, like supposedly Ross is on his second triple bypass surgery, I guess. Like at this point, because like his heart just can't take doing this job. So like basically like Natalie is saying in a very rude way that Ross can't do this job anymore and he should not be a field operative anymore because his body just can't take it. But if anything, like yeah, there's just the references of the characters and how they've all been like taken and arrested or have been gone missing in action. So basically, Natalie is to easily be able to, of course, get out of this whole like scene of her like getting away from Ross because why wouldn't she be able to? She's a great spy. But we transition to a place called Morocco. And so there are two widows, and one of them is to be Belova, who are holding a sniper rifle to, I guess, a Black Widow deserter. I guess. I don't know what her name is. I'm assuming this might be Ingrid, like looking at IMDb, but I'm not exactly sure. So, Belova is to be like holding a sniper to this woman, and eventually the woman is to spot them, and so this girl is to rabbit or to try to escape, and Belova is to try to go after her. And when this girl is to do so, this girl is to hit Belova with this chemical gas that they like. There's so much stuff that they try to explain in this movie, and they have to give a sciencey explanation for a lot of stuff in this film. And I'm just like, like, can't you just like layman terms all of this stuff? Like, why do you have to make it seem like some like expert scientist is gonna be like, yeah, that Marvel, yeah, like they perfectly explained all of this. Simplify it. Like they eventually get that point, but like they eventually get there, but still, like they have to go through all this like sciencey jargon, and I'm just like, ugh, like give me a break. They eventually simplify it when Belova is to talk to Natasha and just mention that this is just a antidote uh, for mind control, basically. Like that's what this chemical gas is that is in these like test tubes, and so uh, Commander Dracoff is to eventually send Taskmaster out or have the Taskmaster protocol be initiated just because Belova had gone rogue. And so now the Taskmaster protocol has been sent out. And so, since Black Widow had been able to escape from Ross, we now head with Widow to go to Norway, a very familiar place to quite possibly Thor fans, because I think they've done enough stuff with Norway in other movies. like as if they couldn't, as if they have a limited place to go anywhere with this. So remember, everyone, that this is Civil War, so there's going to be some times at some points where there's going to be references of Marvel characters, because eventually it's going to happen, because all these people technically exist. So eventually we have just kind of Widow, who is to try to get off the grid, and she is going to do that with a guy, I believe his name is Mason. And so Mason is to just kind of bunker down where I guess Black Widow had bunkered down numerous times when she wanted to get like off the grid. And so Mason is to give Black Widow numerous like fake IDs for her to eventually exhaust out. One of the IDs has some like bizarrish like Fanny Bottom or something like that. And like Scarlet is like, dude, this sounds like a 12-year-old made up this name. And the guy and Mason is just like, well, no, that's a real name. Like that's a real name somewhere. And so Natalie was like, okay, sure. So it seems that Mason is to give Natalie a ton of like fan mail from all of her friends around the world, just saying, "Hey, Black Widow, we love you, Romanoff. Yeah, keep doing what you're doing." And so Mason is to also mention that uh, there is a file in there, or a letter in there from Budapest, if that means anything to Natasha. And so Natasha is just like, okay, all right, like that's telling me that my sister probably sent me a letter. I'll go and I'll check that out. So Natasha is to go and get a letter from her sister, and the thing is to be of this chemical gas. And so also Belova is to send Natasha like this old photo reel of them as young kids, just like in a photo booth together, as like this memory of just like, hey, I miss you kind of thing. So uh anyways, so Natasha is to drive off, I guess, thinking that she is going to want to go and see her sister. So all of a sudden, like, Natasha is to just drive, and then all of a sudden she is to, I guess, hit by a bazooka, and then her car just freaking explodes, and I'm like, whoa, like, that actually scared me while watching this movie, because, like, whoa, like, this is kind of unexpected, but, like, it was kind of interesting, but, like, this doesn't exactly, like, seem to really go anywhere, because, so, like, Natasha gets like shoved almost off of this bridge, and so she's like barely hanging on with her car for this bridge, and so Taskmaster is to get out like of Taskmaster's car, and I'm trying to figure out how to easily like, because we don't know who this person is, so it'd be much easier to say like every time Taskmaster, whether like to keep who this person is a secret. So uh so Natasha is to eventually fight Taskmaster, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is kind of happening like we're about like 27 minutes in to finally actually get one fight in this movie, because that's how much like nothing is going on for almost the first like 30 minutes of this film, and this film is 2 hours. Just a bunch of dialogue that doesn't seem to really go anywhere, and then eventually we finally get a fight 27 minutes later, because I kind of timed it out. So like Natasha is fighting Taskmaster, and I still can't find there being like a real true copying of technique coming in here. Like, but I never really see that through Taskmaster through this entire film. Like how this character copies people. I don't see Taskmaster fighting anybody long enough to start to pick that up, because I just don't see it. I feel like they did that on purpose, just to like, yeah, like we don't really want to show enough fights of Taskmaster because we just don't want to like feel like it's copying any like we don't really like there's too much of brief moments to really showcase that, and it's just awful. So Taskmaster tries to beat Natasha, but Taskmaster isn't there to like go and fight Natasha. It's really just to get to the uh, chemical gas things that Belova was to mail to Natasha. So Widow immediately sniffs that out, and so when Taskmaster is to eventually go and get this little briefcase that the chemical gas was to be in, Taskmaster finds that empty, and so Black Widow is to scoot off and to still have the chemical gas with her. So now pushing on. So now Black Widow or Natasha had figured out a way to be able to make it to Budapest, because she needs to go and re-meet up with her sister Belova and kind of just reminisce about old times, and to also fight her sister because it's been a while since they fought one another. So, so when Natasha is to knock on Belova's door, really Natasha is not really knowing if she could actually trust her sister or not. And so Natasha is to come in there kind of like with a gong cocked kind of. And so eventually both Belova and Natasha like are coming in there. And so like Belova is kind of giving Natasha crap about going off to team up with the Avengers and stuff like that. And so eventually both sisters are to fight it off, or to fight out, just to kind of test their skills for one another, see if one another is rusty or not. But eventually that leads with them talking after this whole fight is kind of over, and they kind of feel like, okay, like we've gotten that out of the way. And so eventually they are to talk about the chemical gas thing that Natasha was to bring with her. And Belova's like, dude, you brought that with you? Like, you were supposed to, like, give it to somebody and, like, have them make, like, a mass amount of this, because this is to be, like, an antidote to mind control. And so, like, I thought it would be, like, in perfectly good hands if I brought it to you, but you just brought it back to me. So what a waste of time that was. Because Natasha needed to understand what the heck that this was. And so also, like, Natasha was asking, it's like, well, yeah, like, shouldn't you have given this to someone? Like, shouldn't you have given this to, like, a scientist or somebody really smart, like Tony Stark? And Natasha's like, well, me and Stark aren't on speaking terms. So immediately, like, the more and more I started to watch this movie, the more and more I started to piece things together. I'm like, wait, like, is this, like, I was thinking, like, this was, like, way far, like, in between the time that, like, I was thinking that this was, like, Endgame at first, bizarrely. I'm like, is this, like, when Captain America went back in time? And so, like, Captain America all of a sudden did an Avengers, like, during this time period, but all of everybody is younger now? Like, what is this? But then I was like, But after the movie was finished, I'm like, wait a minute, no, this is during Civil War. And so, yeah, of course, both Natasha and Stark aren't on speaking terms because Natasha went with Team Cap. And so, like, she's not going to be getting Stark's help anytime soon, up until probably maybe Infinity War or somewhere in there. So, uh, so Belova is thinking it's like, well, like like Belova thought that maybe Natasha would be going and sending out Captain America to fight the Red Room, and Natasha is just like, no, like that's not going to happen. And so they start talking about Dracoff, uh, and so eventually that leads to them eventually to start to get attacked by Black Widows. Like Black Widows or Widows start showing up, and so both Belova and Natasha decide that they need to get away, of course, from these widows. So they decide to go and run to the top of this building and go and take a think like this looks like a chimney or like a smokestack or something. And so they detach this thing from this building and they start swinging from one building to the other. And so eventually one of the widows go and they are to like try to grab onto this as well. But eventually Natasha is to kick this widow off. And so this widow is to go flying down and she is to get hurt and like smack into this little like pond like thing. And so Natasha doesn't get a good enough grip of this like smokestack like thing, and like Belova is to like go flying into a window after this thing falls, but Natasha is to eventually just like try to grab a piece of this building, but then eventually she starts like smacking into stuff and eventually hits the dumpster and then like falls onto the ground. And like here's the funny thing. Uh we always have in this movie bizarrely that Belova has to make fun of Natasha for having this like superhero landing or this bizarrish pose, like this Iron Man pose. Like Iron Man has made that the most like popular thing, but eventually I guess every once in a while you start to see other people do that. Like eventually Belova is to like start mentioning that in a part of this movie, but that doesn't come up quite yet, but eventually we'll get there. So we have both we have both Natasha and Blova who are now transitioning from where this building was to this subway station. Because when Natasha is to go and check on this widow is to terminate her own self. She is to put her weapons up against her head and kill her own self off because Dreykov is forcing her to do so. And this widow is mentioning, I don't want to do this. I don't want to kill myself. But she ends up having to forcibly do so. And so both Natasha and Belova start to run off through this subway because eventually the Taskmaster is to follow after them. So we also find out that Belova is also bleeding. And so we push on to eventually have Natasha and Belova hiding out in a part of this subway where Natasha had hung out with Barton for a number of days, like in a part of this subway. And you can kind of tell because there's a number of like tic-tac-toe things. And of course, considering that this is Budapest, like maybe this could be any number of like things that happen during Budapest, but there's also a bunch like these whole big stories and stuff like that that happen in this movie. And like I think there might be times that this movie may have some rewatchable things just to like see what parts of this movie that you didn't quite get, or eventually like this might just have rewatchability just because like you want to get to the one part where they reference something, because that's all this movie is references, ladies and gentlemen. So so now we are to go into the story about Black Widow and her wanting to get out of the Red Room. And so what ends up happening is that uh, Natasha was to be like having an earpiece in and talking to Barton. And so Dreykov was to be in his office, and they were supposed to detonate a bomb to go off uh, in Dreykov's office. Coincidentally, Dreykov's daughter was there, like during that time, and so really, Natasha just desperately wanted to get out of this red room, and Natasha thought that this was going to be the only one chance that she was going to have to basically kill off Dreykov. And so Natasha made the call for Hawkeye to blow the building. Coincidentally, Dreykov had made it out of the building alive, and evidently his daughter didn't. So I guess that is really and truly read in Natasha's ledger, is for that daughter to die. So eventually, Belova is to mention that maybe one of the Avengers are to eventually go and come here and come for Natasha at some point, or to like eventually like come and help them, because reasonably like it feels like they really need help with this case, because uh the god from space isn't exactly going to need an ibuprofen to be able to make it through their day. And so that's what kind of Belova is getting at, that maybe like Natasha should call for backup. And Natasha is like, well, there's nobody to really call. Like everybody's just on and doing their own thing. So it's going to be really difficult for me to want to call anybody. So, uh, so if anything, also like Belova has to make fun of Natasha for the pose of which that every single one of these people have to do, because all of them are the exact same, because all of them do the one Iron Man pose that he's most iconically used in Iron Man 3, when Iron Man is to get every single one of his pieces of armor during that Christmas time part in Iron Man 3. Once Iron Man is to get every single piece of armor, he is to like put his fist down onto the ground and have his like knees kind of like bent down, and that's when Iron Man is to get up and like, yeah, I'm the best. And like, so that one iconic pose that Iron Man is to mostly be known for, eventually it seems that Belova is to say, well, I think a lot of people have like used that pose at some point or another. That like eventually like Deadpool calls it the superhero landing, when eventually someone is to just kind of like drop down and have their fist in the into the ground. That's like the superhero landing. So Belova makes fun of the pose because she has to like adjust her hair and fling it back and just like, yeah. And Natasha's like, good God. So, um, so eventually both of them have this this little uh like just heart to heart talk between one another. And so what they end up talking about is Belova is to mention that, like, hey, like, what did you do with your like original like what did you do with your real like name and everything like that. And Natasha is to be like, hey man, I got rid of that years ago. And so Belova is like, well, I didn't. Like, if anything, I just decided to uh like rewrite my whole life, and like to say that, like, yeah, I am still like who I am, but I'm gonna like just write in like any number of like stories of any parts of my family. Like, Natasha is to have supposedly gone off with Clint Barton, and them two had been like boyfriend and girlfriend, and Natasha's like, yeah, that's not gonna happen because Age of Ultron. And then Blow was like, yeah, I saw that movie. No, she didn't. But like Natasha's like, yeah, that's not gonna work out because Belova is to mention a person who is to rebuild homes, so that is to mean Clint. And Natasha's like, yeah, that ship has sailed. That's not gonna happen. So and so they both decide, after they're kind of catching up, and they're kind of like talking about things and talking about how like their life technically should have gone or whichever. They both decide that they want to go and take down the Red Room. Like, that's their main goal, is they want to like free all these women that couldn't have been free like they were. So, let me pause here for a second to do a little bit of a reset. I'm back. One thing that I guess I forgot to mention, I didn't realize it till I was like, I had time, I had a break for a second here. While the family was to drive off to make it to the hangar, to make it to the plane, Belova is to desperately say that she wants to listen to her favorite song. Coincidentally, of course, that song was to um, be the Bye Bye Miss American Pie, drove my Chevy to the levee, but the levee was dry. Like that song. Like, this will be the day that I die kind of song. So I don't remember what the actual title of that song is, but like I pretty much sang it, so you can probably figure out the lyrics or whichever. But yeah, so that song was be like used in this movie, and I kind of wonder how much they had to pay to use that song in this movie, because I'm wondering if that cost more than the Whitney Houston song. I don't know. It could have been a lot. I don't know. But anyways, so and that song will get re-referenced at a part in this movie. That's why I had to mention it, because I'm like, oh yeah, this song gets re-referenced because eventually it will. So, but anyways, so the girls both decide to go and take a helicopter from Mason. And yeah, I went into IMDb afterwards and looked it up, and yeah, the guy's name coincidentally was correct. It was Mason. I was actually just guessing, and I guessed correctly, bizarrely. So lucky for me that I quickly, because I think I quickly scanned IMDb, but if I get words pronounced ill correctly or whatever, I apologize. There's some stuff where I didn't think that I would absolutely need um, for this one to look through a lot of stuff, because there's a lot of like nobodies in this movie, in all brutal honesty. So the sisters take a plane uh, to go on a mission. And so Mason is to tell Natasha, like, hey, you know what? Like, it's starting to get really hard for me to get any clients because of my affiliation with you. A lot of people don't even want to take my phone calls, kind of thing, and nobody wants to do business with me. And General Ross is starting to like sniff around. And so, like, Natasha is just like, well, okay, well, like, basically after this, like, Natasha is probably going to be out of this guy's hair regardless. So, uh, so now we are to transition um, into now Red Guardian at a prison because this guy had been put into prison for the rest of his life. I guess he was to have a number of probably life sentences that were to basically say, yeah, you're going to die in prison. Like, this guy doesn't seem like he's aged all that much since we originally saw him, but like Red Guardian, of course, if you didn't know, even though they do technically mention it in this movie, he's a super soldier, so he's going to age a lot slower than you are to think of him to age as. And here's the thing that kind of confused me. I'm like, it really doesn't look like that also Melina had aged either. And I'm like, what, did she like dye her hair, or did they just purposely like not exactly make her to me look old enough, if you know what I mean? Or like, I don't know if she had any like super soldier thing into her, because why? Like, it didn't really seem like she ever needed it, because Red Guardian has mentioned how like Red Guardian was always the muscle, and Melina was the brains behind the whole operation. So why would she ever need any kind of super soldier serum? But anyways, so uh, so now we are at this Red Guardian's prison, which I guess it's supposedly from IMDb, like from some of the guards. Supposedly this prison was to be in uh, Gulslag or Gulslag, from what I am to see through some of these. Um, uh, oh, Gulag. And if that's ill pronounced, then I do apologize. But also, uh, anyways, so we're in this prison, and so Red Guardian is basically arm wrestling every single one of the inmates. He's touting about a story about him eventually fighting Captain America, and that supposedly the Red Guardian had pushed Captain America out some window, and that's how Red Guardian like got away from Captain America. I guess because both Red Guardian and Captain America had fought one another at some point, and one of the prisoners had asked Red Guardian's like, well, hey, like, what year did that happen? And Red Guardian's like, well, 83, 84. And the prisoner is like, well, that seems like a very interesting story, because if anything, 83 and 84 is when Captain America was still like frozen. And so there's no way that that could have ever actually happened. And so Red Guardian just goes to break this guy's hand because of just him being like, dude, you're gonna question me, Red Guardian? Like, I can make up all kinds of stuff, and I can hurt people too if like you want to be stupid. So, so Red Guardian is to eventually go to the prison guards to find out that I guess he has a bunch of fan mail that he is to get. So, Red Guardian is to eventually just start to thumb through some of the mail, and he is to find one thing with an action figure in it, and so an action figure of him. And so Red Guardian is play with his little Red Guardian action figure, and immediately hit like the star part of the toy, and it's to make out some sound. And then so all of a sudden, like Red Guardian is to continue playing with this, and all of a sudden the head comes off, and all of a sudden like he's looking around, just going like, "Oh crap!" And then so all of a sudden, the Red Guardian head has like an earpiece on it, and so Red Guardian takes the earpiece and puts it in his ear, and it's now Natasha and Belova who are talking to him. So, uh, and so now Natasha is to try to help Red Guardian escape from this prison, like telling him exactly where to go and what to do. Excuse me. And so Natasha is to also tell Red Guardian to not cause a scene, and that's immediately what he does, because he ends up like breaking and flinging a door and all kinds of things, just causing this pandemonium to go on, to where everybody and their brother are knowing all good and well that Red Guardian is to be breaking out of prison. Plus, also, Red Guardian goes and breaks through this one glass to take down these guards that he is to get his fan mail from. And so, while Red Guardian is to just kind of make his way through this prison, and Natasha's like, "Come on, super soldier, like, come on, like, get going, like, we need you for this mission." And so, coincidentally, we have Natasha who's just kind of waiting on Red Guardian, and he's taking too long. So Natasha drops down and, of course, does her superhero pose, and Belova is like rolling her eyes, just like, "Oh God, of course she has to do that." So Natasha goes and is trying to help out Red Guardian, and so eventually that just leads to eventually Belova is getting pretty well shot up by this security tower, and so Belova is to take a bazooka to this security tower, and then Natalie, where am I getting Natalie from? Romanoff. Let's go with Romanoff. That's easier. So Romanoff is to go and rope herself up to this helicopter, and then she is to go and eventually swing around and grab Red Guardian. And so both Romanoff and Guardian make their way into the helicopter, and so Red Guardian is like, "Well, hey, like, aren't you happy to see me," kind of thing, and like, "Hey, man, like, it's a family reunion kind of thing," and he's like, yeah, he's all excited about being out of prison and everything like that. And so both Natasha and Belova are just like, "Yeah, no, like, we need you, but like, we don't want you here," kind of thing. Like, you basically sold us. You basically, like, you got rid of us as quickly as you could. And so immediately we have Red Guardian, who's to mention, it's like, "What? Like, is it your time of the month?" And Belova is like, no, like, me and Natasha can never have a time of the month ever again, because of how they basically sliced and diced, parts of our organs that has anything to do with that into little itty bitty pieces. And so immediately Natasha is to ask Red Guardian, where is the Red Room? And so really, like, Red Guardian is to not be able to really give them any legitimate answers, But Red Guardian is to mention it's like, well, hey, like I got a bum rap too. Like if anything, Dreykov had uh, forcibly put Red Guardian in prison for the rest of his life, and so also Red Guardian is to mention that Melina is actually not dead. Like both Natasha and uh, Belova were to naturally assume that Melina, their mother, was to be dead, and that's actually not the case. That actually Melina is to be at a farm somewhere farming pigs, and like she's just off in the middle of nowhere. So eventually what ends up happening is, so Belova is just like, yeah, like I don't think that we're gonna have enough gas in this helicopter to make it to where you're saying that Melina is. And Red Guardian is like, no, I think we're gonna have plenty enough gas to get there. And so all of a sudden, this helicopter has to make like an emergency landing because they ran out of gas. And so they're like, what did you say about gas? Kind of thing. So but luckily, they are just enough away from where the farm is to where this is technically to be fine. So all of a sudden, Red Guardian, Natasha, and Belova are to eventually just walk to Melina's farm. And so while that is to go on, we have Red Guardian who is to ask Natasha, it's like, hey, like, yeah, you've been with the Avengers, right? Because eventually, like, Red Guardian was to give Natasha crap about going off to the West and go and be an Avenger. And Natasha's like, well, yeah, like I had to go to the West and be an Avenger because like I felt like they needed me. And so, but anyways, so Red Guardian is to ask Natasha, it's like, hey, like, did Captain America ever talk about me? Like, did Captain America ever talk about Red Guardian? Did he ever talk about me? And like Natasha never even brought up Red Guardian to Captain America, let alone like Captain America's like, man, the one villain that I like it just always got in my crosshairs was Red Guardian. Like I'm sure he has howling stories about the Red Guardian and how he was such a menacing character that he fought numerous times over, I'm sure. So Natasha's like, no, like he didn't go into like rants about you, like so Red Guardian is just like before they are to get to Melina, like Red Guardian is just like desperately wanting for like these girls and him to like be family. He's just like, hey man, like I'm just so happy that we're all together. Like I'm so proud of you girls and like that basically you're still alive at this point, like kind of thing. And so like the girls are just like, yeah, that's great. That's great. Like Red Guardian, that's great. Like so they make it to mom's pig farm, and so uh, once they are to actually get to the farm and meet Melina, we have the Red Guardian who's like, honey, we're home. Like kind of like the traditional way to just come into the thing. So uh so all of a sudden everyone is to sit down at a dinner, and so Melina is to just kind of give Natasha crap about her posture while at the dinner table. And I think like she gives her crap about like hunching over or whatever. So Natasha is to again ask Melina about the red room, like, hey, where's the red room? We want to know now. And so Melina is just like, well, what, like, what does that matter to you right now? Like, if anything, like, it feels like you want to like capture something that's unobtainable. It's like your father when he was to talk about you guys going and like staying up to try to catch Santa Claus, and so yeah, like Red Guardian is like, well, yeah, like if anything, like doesn't it sound like a very goofy story? Like the guy comes down from a chimney, and once the cookies are all gone, that Santa Claus has been there, and like what it wasn't that a goofy story to tell you kids when you were younger and whatever. So uh so eventually also like the Red Guardian is to be looking at his wife and he's like, man, you haven't aged a day. If anything, you still look great. And also Red Guardian had went out of his way when Melina or when he is to go into Melina's home, Red Guardian is to put on his Red Guardian outfit, and luckily enough it still fits. It looks like it is a like an arduous process to put on because this guy like his pants don't fit quite right, and also like the helmet feels like a weird kind of process to put on every single time. So like I could imagine any number of times that like maybe like uh the guy who plays Red Guardian, the guy of course from Hellboy and Stranger Things or whatever, like I could have just imagined numerous times him like hitting himself like just trying to put the helmet on numerous times. But anyways, so but the Red Guardian is to also like mention to his wife, it's like, hey, uh like it's been a long time since you and me have been together, and like I like from prison I have like a ton of energy, and Tasha and Belova are like, oh my god, like you guys will not do that here. Like I don't care how long it's been, no, you guys are not going to be doing that. So Melina is to bring in one of her pigs, and bizarrely, her pigs is to open this door itself and come on in. And so Melina is to have this pig hold its breath, and so the pig does so. And so this pig is holding its breath for a very decently long time. So Melina is to mention that they had purposely infiltrated the North Institute, which supposedly when they were to go in there, like the Widows and Red Guardian and like Taskmaster and so on and so forth, they all naturally assumed that these were just Shield scientists, and hence they found out later it was actually Hydra scientists. And what were to be there were these discs, but there were also to have the Winter Soldier project there as well. And but the only disc that they could take that had any information on it was for them to be able to steal the power to be able to unlock the control of free will, meaning that they had figured out how to harness the ability of forcing people to do things for them, and so they've been doing it ever since. That's why the Black Widow had killed herself, because really it takes this chemical gas to stop these women from killing themselves, because if anything they were controlled by any number of things like pheromones or any number of things that would control them or whichever. So uh anyways, we find out that uh like this pig is eventually just going to die soon, and Melina like is to let this pig breathe again, and so this pig is fine, and so like Melina is just to mention like, yeah, like this pig is to do whatever I say because it has to. And so eventually after like the whole dinner thing is over, eventually Melina and Natasha are to have a moment alone, and so Melina is to talk to Natasha about her real mother, like because Melina is just a mother that she had at some point, but like it's not her biological mother. It's just a mother that she just had at some point in time. So, uh, Melina is to mention that Natasha's real mother was desperately fighting to get Natasha back and eventually had to deal with Dreykov. And so eventually we also find out that Natasha was to find old photo albums, and I guess those were all of heavily fake holidays. That Natasha remembered a time where they were to get like several things like propped together and to make the scenery look different so that way they could try to fake all these photos together. And I thought that was like, wow, like this is so like in depth and so like crazy. We also found out that like they're doing fake holidays, and even like the presents under a tree during Christmas were all empty and weren't real. And I'm like, wow, that's crazy. So if anything, after this whole like album reading, and also the Red Guardian had went to talk to Belova, and like Red Guardian had shared a story about him going ice fishing, and him almost losing or him almost getting uh, like uh, like frostbite, and bizarrely Red Guardian's father had peed on Red Guardian, and like that kind of excuse me, who and that like stopped Red Guardian from getting frostbite bizarrely. So pee on your people, kids. It'll save someone's life. Weirdly enough. So uh and then also Red Guardian is to sing with Belova like that one song that she used to sing every time while they were in the car together to remember old times. Plus, also, Belova was to give Red Guardian the crack about like, dude, like, what are you doing now? Like, no one's gonna ever give a crap about you being Red Guardian anymore. Or like, Belova called him like Crimson Dynamo, and Crimson Dynamo is actually another like famous Russian villain that I guess they never used in any number of these movies, but I'm hoping eventually at some point that they should have, or they could have, or they really should have went with that somewhere, but they never did, and I was kind of just upset about that. Like that's like an Iron Man villain that's a Russian villain, and I guess I guess they're never going to probably do anything with that, which kind of just sucks. As well as any number of people, like I mentioned, like Red Omega, which is also another Russian villain. But so Red Guardian is to mention it's like it's not Crimson Dynamo, it's Red Guardian, and like Beloved knows that, but she's just saying it to give Red Guardian crap. So uh, Melina is to tell Natasha that Melina had already alerted the Red Room to come here to go and retrieve all of them, and so uh, yeah, I think I got to all that. So the Red Room is to show up with all the widows and taskmasters, and so Red Guardian is to be the first one to be tranquilized, darted, and so they shoot him once, and so Red Guardian is like, ha, 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 ha. Like I guess they don't realize, and then all of a sudden, like Red Guardian gets like pelted with tranquilizer darts, and then he falls over. He's like, plop, and so uh, we have the mom kind of going through and tranquilizing everybody. And so we're like, wait a minute. So Melina was like a villain this whole entire time. And like she's taking all of these like people on this jet to make their way to the Red Room, and uh, and so Melina is to talk to Dreykov and just kind of like talk about how like she's back with them and all kinds of things. And so what is happening is because of Belova's like betrayal, that she's technically a traitor, they decide that they want to go and cut her brain. They want to like open her up, and or no, like they just want to open like Belova up, and so they call Natasha a traitor, and then eventually they talk about like chemicals and the pigs and stuff like that. So, but anyways, so eventually they are to have Dreykov talking to Melina, but eventually he is starting to realize when he's talking to her that he might not be talking to the right person. And we find out that Red Guardian and Natasha are in cells together, and but we end up finding out that actually like Natasha is Melina and Melina is Natasha. So Melina is to easily escape from out of Natasha's cell because Melina like built the thing, and Melina also frees Red Guardian because she's built this thing, so she knows how to get things out of it. So Melina is to have an earpiece because both her and Natasha had kind of planned this whole thing out. And so Red Guardians is to think that he has an earpiece so he can be able to talk to these people and kind of like confess and like say the truth to all of them. But Melina's like, yeah, you don't actually have a real earpiece to talk to these girls. He's like, oh, I don't? And they're like, no, you don't. So Melina is to tell Belova that she is to have a 2-inch knife in her pants pocket and to try to like get that out, because like she's going to have to like fend for herself there to get out of there. Belova in some part of this movie is to talk about her vest in this film. How Belova is to have this vest and how it has so many pockets, and I bet like Natasha really loves it. And Natasha's like, yeah, like I think I do really like it. So much so that maybe I'm going to use it in some other movie. So, and so anyways, we eventually go into like the explanation of Melina and Nat's like entire plan, how they basically figured out every single thing that they are going to do when they are to get to the Red Room. And so Natalie is to now confront Dreykov, and so Natalie is to want to know about her mother, her biological mother. And Dreykov is like, oh, yeah, like, that woman. Well, like, we buried her underneath, like, some tree, and, like, it had some unique flower on it, but we're not quite really sure. And if anything, we just marked, like, her grave, and we just marked it unknown because we didn't even care who she was. And so we end up finding out that Dreykov is to bust out Taskmaster. And so And so now we are to desperately need to figure out now who actually is Taskmaster. So, now we are to unmask this person to show who it actually is. And it actually is just Dreykov's daughter, um, Antonia, if I'm pronouncing that right. Like I'm probably never gonna say that actual name again, so I'll probably just go right back to just calling her Taskmaster from now on. But yeah, this is Dreykov's daughter, like the one that Natasha thought that she had killed. No, like uh, Taskmaster is still alive and well, just scarred up a lot, but Taskmaster is to be under control, just like all the other widows are, and under the control of Dreykov. And so, uh, Natalie, because of this information being like known to her, Natalie wants to go and kill Dreykov, and she is going and trying to shoot him, and she is trying to stab him. And Dreykov is like, yeah, like, come at me with your gun. Shoot me with your gun. Like, yeah, like, try to stab me. Go ahead. And Widow is pausing every single time. She can't do either one of those things. And so Dreykov is like, ha 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 ha, ha. Like, guess what? You're under my control because I have been siphoning in gas here, and you are now on a pheromone lock, and you cannot attack me now because the same thing that would be controlling any other widow is now controlling you. So, uh, eventually the Taskmaster is to go off and eventually go and find the Red Guardian and fight the Red Guardian. But we don't see enough scenes of both Taskmaster and Red Guardian fighting it out. And what we do see doesn't feel all that great, in all honesty. Belova is to try and sneak out of the spot that she was, and eventually she goes and is to fall out of something and land, and she ends up doing the superhero pose, and she ends up going like, "Oh, like I didn't want to do that, like that's so awful." So, uh, so if anything, what their plan is, because they have still thought everything through, and what their plan is to have Melina go off and try to land this whole spaceship that's up in the sky that is to be the Red Room, and like try to land it onto the ground, call the authorities to get all these Red Room guys like cuffed up, and so also the actual plan was to have Natasha having to break a certain nerve. Like she has to like sever some kind of nerve. She has to hit a specific body part to then be able to uh, get back her control and be able to fight Drake. Because Drake is now just beating up Natasha. And so Dreykov is to mention that all these girls were trash, and that he was the recycler of all these girls that were trash. That he was to um, eventually get all these girls together to make something out of them. And so Melina is to call out to Belova to go to get to all the widows to try and give them this chemical gas, so that way like the widows won't be attacking Natasha or any of these people, because Dreykov still has them under control. So more fights with Red versus Taskmaster, and like eventually like we're gonna keep seeing this Taskmaster fellow keep popping up. um what ends up happening is eventually Red Guardian and Melina eventually are to fight Taskmaster, and eventually they lock Taskmaster into one of the cells that Red Guardian and Melina was before. So that kind of takes care of Taskmaster. So Nat is to see the key of all this through Dreykov, and um, so Natasha goes and severs a nerve of hers, and what ends up happening is that Melina is to go off and kill one of the engines uh, of this red room, because of course, if I didn't mention it before, like this red room is just a floating ship that is on like that is in the earth. It's basically like a helicarrier, but it's just a goofy looking ship like thing that looks like a building, a weird bizarre building in space or in the air technically. So uh the mother is to kill one of the engines of this ship, so the ship is going to fall a lot faster than they kind of expected. So if anything, after Nat is to sever her nerve, Nat can fight Dreykov, and so Nat is starting to beat the crap out of him, but eventually Nat has to forcibly fight off all the widows because Belova didn't get to them in time to like try to chemically gas them all. So, but eventually Belova does get there to gas all the widows. So, anyways, but yeah, the gas hits all the widows, and so what happens after that is the widows make their way out of there because they're like, dude, we gotta freaking escape. Like, this place is probably gonna blow up or any number of things. So they all escaped. And so Natasha is trying to scramble to uh, transfer all this data, like uh, to kind of get all this information of all these people. And I guess maybe that's going to lead to Natasha going and trying to find other places that are like recycling these women and all this kinds of information, and eventually like lead to Natasha eventually finding these widows at some point. And like, who knows, this movie could break out to any number of things, which could be fairly exciting, and could it kind of go into other projects that eventually we might not have been aware of until now, because this might go into other projects because there might be widows that pop up out of the woodwork somewhere now that all of a sudden this movie is now a thing. So the Red Room is blowing up. Uh, if anything, Melina is to go with Red Guardian to get to this plane. Um, and so Natasha is to eventually find Taskmaster in a cell. And so Natasha is just kind of very much tempted to free Taskmaster. And eventually, like, Taskmaster is still, like, mad about what Natasha had done. And so, like, they are almost kind of fighting one another. Um, to eventually have eventually Taskmaster and Natasha like fighting so hard that eventually like Natasha with eventually going into one section of this spot where it's kind of like falling down, and Natasha just so happens to uh, get the right bit of equipment where she is to latch on to a part of this building to where she's just hanging off to the side of something almost like falling to her death almost. So, uh, I want to see if I kind of am covering everything so far. So, Dreykov and his men are all getting on a plane, and so Belova decides to go and put her weapon through this engine, which is not only going to kill the engine, but also basically blow up this plane. And so Belova is to mention to Natasha, it's like, hey, it's been fun, thinking that Belova is probably going to die right after she does this. And so Belova goes and puts this weapon into the engine, which just blows her away, but doesn't kill her. Just kind of blows her away from this like spot. And so, but it kills everybody on this plane. It kills Dreykov, and it kills everyone tied to him. So, Belova is to be falling, and so Black Widow is to kind of fall with her, and eventually is to find a way to get a parachute on Belova, but eventually Taskmaster is incoming. Like, Taskmaster is trying to find a way to just kind of like figure out like pieces and stuff where like both Natasha and Taskmaster can kind of piece their way to to still like fighting to the point to where eventually both Natasha and Taskmaster are fighting like on the ground, eventually waiting for Belova to make her parachuting way down there. So Natasha and Taskmaster are to fight. Eventually, Natasha is to find a way to gas Taskmaster, and so that kind of resolves that whole thing with Taskmaster and Natasha. And I'm kind of waiting to see what they eventually do somewhere down the road with Taskmaster, but I don't really care. Like, this character, like, once I found out who this person was, I was like, I don't care. Like, this person did not have a riveting thing for me to go like, oh man, I can't wait to see what Taskmaster does after this movie. So, Natasha is to go back to Belova's parachute and see if she's okay. And that reunites this whole family together. And it seems that Red Guardian and Melina are going to eventually go on to a plane that is to have all the widows arrive. And so General Ross is scrambling to make his way to all of this to try to see who he can arrest, hoping that he's probably going to arrest Natasha out of this. So, if anything, right after this is to cover like 2 weeks after this whole situation. So 2 weeks after this whole situation, now we are to have Natasha, where like her little trailer was like with Mason, and now her hair is to be blonde, and she was to be given Belova's vest, and now Natasha is now wearing Belova's vest. And so now, like, Natasha has short blonde hair and now has the green vest on. And this is to be everything that she's to be wearing going into Avengers Infinity War. And Natasha is to be mentioning that she's going to be going with Captain America to be going and breaking people out of prison. And so, like, this is going to easily transition us into Infinity War. And so, really, we are to have this eventually having a end credit scene. So the end credit scene is to have Belova who is at Natasha Romanoff's grave, because this is now a sequence that covers Avengers Endgame. The end credit scene focuses on Endgame. So, uh, Belova is to be kind of cleaning off Natasha's grave. And so all of a sudden, Belova is to be at this grave, and Valentina, who a lot of people might know from Falcon and Winter Soldier, or just Seinfeld, she's on that a lot. Valentina is to appear here to try to position Belova to be interested in joining her squad. I'm assuming joining her squad uh, with uh, with U.S. Agent. I'm assuming that Belova and U.S. Agent might be putting together maybe a Dark Avengers. We can only hope to eventually go up against Hawkeye in the West Coast Avengers show. Because I'm assuming that's where that Hawkeye show is going to head into. Um, because really, Valentina is to give Belova a file of Hawkeye, who had supposedly caused Natasha's death. And so, like, she has a picture of Hawkeye, of how he's to look in Avengers Endgame. And that is to basically tell us. So, like, this end credit scene is covering Endgame, but you don't actually see U.S. Agent in any part of this scene. I guess this was just like, well, like, I guess, like, we could kind of technically put this movie out at any time after Falcon and Winter Soldier would be okay, because, like, technically this covers, like, the Hawkeye show that isn't out yet. So, like, we just need to release this movie before we get to going on the Hawkeye show, because this is to, like, showcase where that show is technically going. So, uh, but yeah, so, like, I was trying to, like, figure out in my head, like, where all of these movies tie into, because I was just, like, very unsure, because, like, when does Natasha have blonde hair? Because does she have blonde hair in Endgame? I'm like, is this kind of like going through and covering, like Natasha all the way to Endgame, but technically it just covers it to, like, Infinity War, and then you watch Infinity War, and then you watch Endgame, and, like, I guess that's the only movies that Natasha's really to be in. And I guess technically her real true origins was to basically be like Iron Man 2. And so I guess it basically just covers whatever movies that Natasha just isn't in. Hence why they had all those. Um, Maybe that's why on Disney Plus they had all those pictures of Black Widow in every single one of those movies. So they would naturally assume that everybody would watch every single one of the Black Widow movies to eventually tie into this one and, like, showcase, like, this full story of this character. But with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.